All right, students, another reading mini lesson. This will be our last one for the week. Today we're going to be talking about the impact of time periods. So we've talked before that when you're reading historical fiction books, it's very important about when in history your book takes place, because it could be a very different story if it took place during a different time period. So we're going to take a look at that, and then your ReadWorks passage, you will revise or redo that today and submit it. If you chose to do it in Notability, you should have received an email message from me with feedback on how you did. If you chose to do it on the ReadWorks website, it automatically gives you that feedback. All right. So today I want to teach you that readers analyze how time period impacts the character's choices, decisions, and actions. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is you're going to describe the time period of your book. A great place to get some of this information could be on the back of your book or an inside flap of your book. Oftentimes with historical books, they give you a brief look into the time period. Just like in Freedom Summer, if you recall, before I read the book, there was a note about the text and it talked about the time period it took place. So, describe the time period of your book. So I'm going to do that for Freedom Summer, and then you are going to do this with your book club books. So Freedom Summer, if you remember, takes place in the early 1960s. And that time period was a time where segregation was in place. African Americans could not drink from the same drinking fountains as whites. They couldn't attend the same schools, go to the same public areas. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in my description here. During this time, African Americans experienced segregation from other people. Let's put that. No, from people with different colored skin. There we go. Sometimes when you're just doing a description, you have to think it through and make changes, and that's okay. Take your time. So during this time, I forgot my comma after my introductory prepositional phrase, different colored skin, they were not permitted to use the same water fountains, attend the same schools, or share the same public spaces. And then I'm also going to talk about, because my book actually goes into the Civil Rights Act of 1964, I'm going to mention that. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed, which put an end to segregation. And that's the part in my book where Joe is told by his parents that the pool is going to be open to everyone, and he and John Henry get really excited. So even with the passing of the act, some people still chose not to include everyone. And that goes with the closing of the pool and filling it in. So you're going to take a minute and you're going to talk about your time period of your book. So for example, I know I have a group reading about the Battle of Gettysburg. You're going to talk about what it was like during the Civil War. You're going to talk about plantations. So you're going to talk about slave catchers, slavery, escaping slavery, and what was going on then. Those of you who are reading a book similar to mine with the civil rights, you're going to talk about the segregation that was taking place. You're going to talk about the treatment of others and the discrimination that was taking place. Okay, so you're going to think about the time period of your book. You're going to write a little description, and then you're going to tell me how this period of time impacts your characters. Do they do certain things because when the story takes place? So I'm going to talk about Joe and John Henry. Those are my two main characters. If you only have one main character, you only have to do one. But if you have multiple, you might want to tie them in together. So Joe and John Henry choose to swim in the creek because that's the only place they can both swim together. So that's a choice they make because of what's going on. They both can't go to the pool. John Henry chooses not to go into Mr. Mason's store because of the color of his skin. Joe chooses to buy things for John Henry so he can enjoy, so they can enjoy them together. Joe also hides his friendship from Mr. Mason because he knows how Mr. Mason views John Henry. So these are all things in the story that are happening because of this time period. If Joe and John Henry were living in a different time period, they might not choose to swim in the creek. If they were living in a time where everyone was included, they might be swimming at a place like Forest Park Pool. So the time period in which a story takes place really impacts how the characters behave. John Henry, if it was taking place in a different time, he might go into that store. Joe might tell everyone about his friend John Henry. So again, today what you're going to focus on is the time period in which your book takes place and certain actions your characters do. If you're reading the Battle of Gettysburg, think about how Thomas and Bertie, because they were growing up during a time of slavery and they could be sold, what do they do because of that? Well, they flee, they run away. If you're reading Bud Not Buddy, think about how Bud would be different in a different time period. What other actions would he do instead? Mississippi Bridge, think about your main characters. Think about what happens with the bus. Think about what happens at the store. Would your characters behave differently if it took place in a different time like today? And then Watson's Go to Birmingham. Think about the time period in which your book takes place. Would your characters behave differently given different circumstances? Would Byron behave differently? Would the Watsons go to Birmingham? Think about all of those things. You're going to complete this in your reading notebook, which I've started a sample here. So you're going to put the title of your book, remember title at the top on the left. You're going to put the date on the right, and then you can describe the time period of your book, and you're going to go ahead and put that underneath, and then go ahead and write this, and you're going to explain what your characters do based on the time period they're in. If you have any questions, I'll be available. You can message me on Canvas, you can send me an email, you can, however you feel most comfortable communicating with me. And we will have a Zoom meeting today at 11. I sent a message about that, and you need to have something important or meaningful that you want to share, and we're going to do it like a show and tell. All right, guys. Hope you are doing well, and I look forward to talking to you.